actually my pleasure. I'm most excited to introduce our new telehealth and medicine editor-in-chief, Amar Gupta, PhD, from the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science, Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT. And that was only 2 lines long. It's usually 3 lines, but anyway, a disruptive force and humanitarian. Dr. Gupta teaches MIT's most popular telehealth and telemedicine and telehealth for enhancing global health course. And he pioneered content-based image search techniques on microcomputers and developed the character recognition technology used today for electronic check processing. That is this document. We can all touch it after. He developed neural network algorithms for reading mammograms, drastically reducing the incidence of false negatives and false positives. He developed a neural network-based system slashing by half of a national pharmacy chain's $1 billion drug inventory while maintaining the same probability for drug stop. You can tell us who that was later. And really, truly, this man does not need an introduction. He needs a red carpet. And it is with pride that I introduce Dr. Amar.
Thank you very much. I have a reputation for offending people, so by the end of it, some of you may not even want to see me anymore. Let's begin on the basis. First of all, I like to give all these lectures in real time based on the points or comments to give. We can't have it interactive, but again, I'll take into account. The first thing I should say is, which is not part of my official speech, that Kosovo has actually played a major role in the presentation that I'm going to give right now. And the reason I do it is that one of the doctors which really motivated me to look at the area of telemedicine, he was actually born in Kosovo, and some of his family members were killed in the civil war there. And the way he thought he was going to get even with the world is to become a doctor and save lives. And he's the main person who was involved in the starting of the virtual hospital concept which was just described. So with that basis, I'm going to start the presentation and go from there. Okay. So in most part of the world, including the US, the chances of survival after a trauma incident are 1/2 in the rural areas as compared to the urban areas. This is because of the time it takes a person to be taken to the hospital, the bleeding which takes place. So the first hour is considered the golden hour. If you're treated in it, there's much more chances of it. So Arizona went ahead and invested a lot of money in the concept of tele-trauma centers, by which you went to a rural center, you were actually connected to another center, and that was the way they designed the system. A car accident took place in Mexico, a few miles from the American border. 6 adults died on the spot in the car accident, and only one child who was badly injured, 6 months old, was left. The child was brought over to the US side. The doctor was at the place. That was the first day the doctor was at a clinic. She had never practiced before. That was the first person. She didn't know what to do. She was connected with this Dr. Ricardo Titi, who worked in Tucson, and based on that, that child's life was saved. This is a real story, real case. The thing which intrigued me after that is, I said, you've done this, why couldn't it be done in Mexico? Why couldn't it be done at any other place? Are you going to make it national? And the answer which was given to me is going to be illegal to make it national. And that really intrigued me. What is it? Why is it illegal? What are we doing here? So I went ahead and did a lot of research. Came across another piece from Roche Pharmaceuticals. Roche, anybody here from Roche? I'm not saying anything negative today, so you can put your hand up. So Roche Pharmaceuticals started a new company called MyDoc.com, by which patients in Chicago could consult a doctor in Indiana by electronic means. The company won all the awards in the first year for being the most innovative company. The patients in Chicago were very happy. The doctors in Indiana were very happy, but the doctors in Chicago were very unhappy, and the company was closed down based on the premise that it's illegal to give medicine without doing a physical consultation. We looked at the laws of Illinois, we did not find any requirement anywhere that it had to be a face-to-face kind of interaction. We were intrigued about it. So we went ahead and we said, why is the government even involved in healthcare? What business does the government have? Where did the first start? If anybody has any ideas on any of these questions I raised, you can raise your hand, I'll give you a chance to do it. It happened a long time ago in a town in New England. And as we go along, I'm going to give you more clues about this town and ask you to identify what town it is. So the people who are coming on the boat from Europe, they were contracting yellow fever. The city said we have the right to force you to take medicines, to put you in quarantine. And it was done under the doctrine of public safety and public health, the same doctrine that was the police powers down, saying that we have the right to intervene in order to keep you alive and keep you safe. We did a lot of research after that, looked at every single case over the last 300 years, and then drafted a very controversial paper saying all the restrictions imposed by state governments on interstate practice of telemedicine, they violate the interstate commerce clause of the US Constitution, and therefore all these laws are illegal and inapplicable. So we were essentially saying that within the states can go ahead and do whatever we feel like, but once it comes to being across the state boundaries, only the federal government has rights under the US Constitution, and therefore all these laws are illegal. Published in a major law journal, as usual with many of my work, which I do, I got a lot of hate mail messages, I'm trying to disturb the country, I'm trying to do things. And 7 years later, the Department of Veterans Affairs used my paper as the main basis to change the entire nationwide law in order to start a new policy on, which is the nationwide policy of the Department of Veterans Affairs on telemedicine. The director came and met with me, spent full day with me from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. When I was driving into the airport, he said, "You're not a lobbyist, you're not being paid for this research, it was considered to be a feature because I wasn't paid by anyone. The fact that I had written this, and it says you answered all these questions." So we have gone ahead and written papers like this in order to break boundaries at the state level. We have written the same thing at the national level. One of the things which I wrote earlier is that for people to get proper sleep, the doctors and nurses, their error rates to decrease it. We should have doctors and nurses working from abroad during daytime to look after patients at night in the US. Again, I got a hate mail saying I'm a traitor, I'm sending US jobs abroad, that's what it is. And recently that model has been adopted by Emory University by posting doctors and nurses in Australia who work in daytime to look after patients at night. So what happens in situations like this? So in the case of the Department of Veterans Affairs, it spent over $1 billion to go ahead and just pay for the transportation cost of patients who are going to health facilities, nothing more than that. If you use systems like this, A, we can reduce the time which it takes to get attention, B is we can reduce the cost that are involved in this affair, and hopefully we can get them better attention on. So again, the reactions vary to it, and when the Department of Veterans Affairs accepted my recommendation, announced the new policy, a number of people complimented me about it, said very good things. And my own colleague in my own department at MIT, in the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence lab building, he walks up to me and tells me on my face, "So, Amar, why do you waste your time on this? A lawyer could have written this paper in less than half a day." That's the reaction that I got. And so many times I've received reactions from the medical community when people say, "Oh, I'm really a doctor. Oh, you're a PhD doctor," as if I'm a phony doctor. That's the way it was almost implied to me. So as it happened, 2 weeks later, a conference was taking place in the same town where this original innovation took place. It has a very wonderful law college, it has a very wonderful medical college. So I went there, I ran into a doctor who had 4 degrees, medicine and law. So I asked him, I said, "What do you feel about interdisciplinary work?" And he says, "Yes, interdisciplinary is the way to go. That's the way we should all be doing things. Yes, everybody should be about medicine and law." Oh, they don't need to learn about computers, even a high school student can write a computer program. So that's the reaction that I got there. And in some way, I almost felt gratified that one profession was going to take a reciprocal kind of remarks on other profession. But my first comment to each and everyone in this room is, you really need to respect the interdisciplinary work which needs to be done in this area. A lot of the reasons why you're having major columns of innovations and deployments is because we are very much in this country, especially in the US, looking after one particular field only. We think because we are in the field, we did something wonderful. Everybody else should follow over, everybody else should do that thing. everything else is very elementary, that's the third graders work. If you don't do that, you will not succeed in your innovations. That is my first suggestion to you all to consider. So if you develop something, reach out to colleagues, reach out to others and all. And by the way, as I said, I've already given you 2 clues about that city. We'll come back to it. If I forget to give you the name, you can come back and ask me or raise a question at the beginning. Let me give you a very real example. This is of a person who got a job in Los Angeles, a very senior job. Went with his wife to look at houses. The wife fell down in the Marriott Hotel. The patient was taken to the best hospital, or really one of the nicer hospitals in the country, belonging to a reputed chain. The reputed chain, this was in the emergency room. The emergency room people looked at the patient and said, yes, you've come here, but we only take care of patients who belong to our own health center system. You are not part of our own system. Therefore, you have to send you away to another emergency room. They tried for 2 hours to send, not 2 hours, more than 2 hours to send to another emergency room. Nobody else would take it, partially because it's banned by law. Patient dumping is not allowed. You are not allowed to go in an emergency room to do it. But they persisted, they would not do it. And finally, the family was advised to go back to Boston, get the emergency surgery done there. The emergency surgery was done 10 days later. Breaks and screws included both the wrists, or both the wrists were fractured. It was a 4-hour-long surgery. And because it took place 10 days later, there is a lot of other medical issues which have come up which will continue for the lifetime and which will increase the cost of the medicine which is involved. Case in point, it is my wife. This has happened to us. So this is the reality of the system that we have today. We have some things which are going great, and some things which are happening today. I gave a keynote address last year. It was live streamed to the entire world. I received letters, messages from all different countries, many different countries, that even though we have a poor system, even though we can afford it, but we've never done it, then we'll send people just because they're not part of our health plan. These are kinds of things which we have. So I'm just giving you the different sides of it. This is the reality, and that's why I said I'm very blunt, very open about these things, because that's the way we have to be to be able to proceed further. Now, I've given this keynote at when the Department of Veterans Affairs asked me, after the Department of Veterans Affairs asked me to accept my advice, but I was asked by an agency of the federal government to come and give a speech in Washington to these senior federal officers. It was a closed-door session only for them. It was a session from 8 o'clock in the morning. The people stayed there until past 10 o'clock. I was the only outsider there. I gave it. I did not take the name of the hospital where this is taken place. After the event, people came to me and asked me where it has taken place. I gave them the name. I did not give them the name. I asked them to make a guess, and every single one of them gave me the right guess for the hospital name. So it's not something that people do not know about, but it continues on. The other amazing thing which happened is when I went to do this keynote addresses, before that I wrote to over 100 people saying I have this very unique opportunity to go to Washington. Give me one thing that you want me to convey to Washington that we should do in order to change the system. I got wonderful responses from people in other countries saying this should be changed, this should be changed. From the US, I got responses again, except for one response. Every single response that I received was fairly one or two categories. That this is a procedure which is not permitted to be reimbursed, the federal government passed thing so that this thing will be reimbursable. And the second one was my salary should be increased. That is the way I'll be motivated to do more technology. So I'm just telling you that you're in the right place and at the right time. If you want to earn more money, this is the right field to be in. And if you want to really do things, you can do it as well. And maybe you can do both of them together, but it becomes far more difficult to do both things together. Now, the other thing which happened is that I got invited by the Federation of State Medical Boards to give the keynote address in Washington. I was very worried about it because essentially I had taken the state powers and to the federal government because of the tradition and all. And they were absolutely the other way. They thought what I had done was great, more things like this should be done. They really wanted to do it. And one of the areas which I looked at was the safety and quality of AI devices and machine learning devices. And we feel, at least at this point, that a lot needs to be done in terms of the care, safety, and quality of these devices. There is essentially no kind of quality control which is being done, and even when it's being done, it's being done by different organizations, different systems, different countries and all. We really need to about some of these issues at a global level at this point. We should not be thinking at the level of a local hospital or a local thing. We really need to cover new paradigms if we will succeed in this industry. Let me take an example. We had statistics about what we have done in this country. Everybody knows in the room that we, on a per capita basis, we spend the largest amount of money in healthcare as compared to any other country of the world. Let's take it up to the rankings. There are two rankings which I use. One is from the CIA and the other is from the World Health Organization. I'm going to use only one of them. It shows the country which is the most efficient one in terms of the number of children who die before the age of 1. Afghanistan is the highest. Monaco is the best in the country, and we are ranked. If you take it in the reverse order, meaning 225, which is the best, should be number 1 essentially, then US is somewhere around the 60th in terms of one ranking, in terms of this one. If we take a ranking of how many age expectancy, we again come to some kind of it. We are at the lowest level of all the developed countries in terms of these statistics. Then I go, no, these are better statistics. You shouldn't be using this. Every country is different. Things here are different. Fine. Every country is different. Let me take it from year to year. Like in the last 20 years, where was the position of the US in these rankings? It has fallen down in both those statistics. That is the way things are happening right now. Telemedicine does offer potential to change the trend. Telemedicine does have the ability to produce it, but we have to do a lot of constructive things before that can happen. The earlier speaker talked about the example from the financial industry, how the financial industry has done a good job, how we are backward in the healthcare industry. So let me take the liberty of suggesting something from the financial industry which can provide some evidence of what we should do here. Just like and there are a lot of similarities between healthcare and banking. Both of them have a lot of information, both of them, the privacy of the information is important, security is important, cost is important, timeliness is important. So there's a lot of factors that make it an interesting comparison. And in both cases in the US, it is dominated by state regulations, not by federal regulations. That's the way the Constitution was arranged for the US. So in the case of banking, a bank was only allowed to operate in one state of the country. It was easy, you were the lender, the borrower, they were all in the same state, you could be done. The first thing which threw it off was the introduction of bank checks. And the government said that if a bank check is there, you are not allowed to still operate a branch outside your state, but we as the government will take care of clearing the check for you. That is the decision that they made. So for 8 years, I used to spend my winters in Arizona, my summers at MIT. If I wrote a check to a dealer in Arizona, Tucson, the dealer would give it to the local bank, and the local bank it would be read by 2 different people to make sure it was read properly. Then it would be encoded at the bottom of the check and we're getting it. Then it would go on a truck to the designated Federal Reserve Board for that particular region, which happens to be Sacramento, California. So every check every day had to go from Tucson to Sacramento, California. Then it would go by an air carrier to Boston. Then it would go to the lead bank, then to the local bank, and then it would be given back to you. The cost of processing by the way, in Switzerland, there was only one check processing center for the whole country. Every physical check had to come there. So this was the way the check processing centers were operated all around the world. The cost of processing a check in the US was $1.25 per check. These are all documented figures. And 44 billion checks were processed each year in the US alone. This was the system that we were using. So we started looking at it, that how can we really process the check with higher speed, higher quality, more electronic technology. And the US is really unique in many respects, one of them being the different ways in which we write checks. We write cents in about 25 different ways in the US. And it's very difficult to read the cents amount as compared to the dollar amount. So my students came up with the suggestion that we should disregard the cent portion, only process the dollar amount. No bank was willing to accept that suggestion, so we just started. We put the suggestion that there should be boxes put so that people are compelled to write in the numbers. No, banks could not accept that. So we started looking at this way of doing it, and nobody in the literature at that point had looked at trying to find accuracies of single digits at a level which was accurate. Postal report was 90%. Postal department was happy with it. No bank was willing to consider it to be used at 90% accuracy. So we went ahead and we were among the first people in the world to start using neural networks for a number of things, including the fact that you see here that people, if you see here, the slash here and the one here are written the same, but they actually mean very different things. There are spacing issues, there are other issues So we came up with a patented technology to be able to read it with very high speed and accuracy, and we tried to give it to the market. And nobody in the market would use it. Anybody want to say why people did not want to use it at all? So we had to start with a very small country abroad as the first test case for our work. This work, incidentally, we did it in a consortium mode. There was no money from the government, and at MIT, everything that we have to do has to be funded by someone. MIT does not use its own internal resources, every research project has to be done. So the way we did it as a consortium model, we got national investors from England, Sumitomo Bank from Japan, Deutsche Bank from Germany, Bradesco Bank from Brazil, Citibank from the US, and we put each of these banks to give us money equivalent to the cost of one fully loaded cost of a professional. At that point, the fully loaded cost of a professional that we did this work was a little over $100,000. We said it was $95,000 each. That's the basis on which we did the work. So in other countries, people were willing to take it to it. In Britain, for example, we found very interesting. The pounds and pence were written in the same size, but there was another reducing disease. The law said at that point that the paper should be in written form. It did not say that the paper had to be written on the thing had to be written on paper. So there was a real case where a person wrote a check on the side of a sheet, took the sheet to the bank, and the bank had to honor it because it was a written form. So we came up with baseline things that the check should be written on paper, it should have boxes and all, and they accepted it within a few months' time. US time. We came to know later what the reason was, and we decided to put a lot of the technology on the web. A number of students were very upset, don't I pay for money? And I said some things in life are more important than money. We should think of whether we left the world a better place than we came in. They were very skeptical and all. And the reason is that in the US, even though the banks were saying, we care for our customers, we really want to do the best. This is, I hear from all the health centers, despite the experience that I've had, they're still paying, they still say that we are the best center. The reason is they were earning interest on the money as this was in pounds. So they actually wanted the check to take as long to clear, maybe a week or two or longer, than to take a shorter. That was the main reason that they wanted to come. Going nowhere in the US. And finally, the thing got adopted because of 9/11. Anybody wants to make a guess why 9/11 played a role in the adoption of this new technology in the US? Yeah? Because of the planes were grounded. Because the planes were grounded, the checks could not move. So within a few days, the country came very close to financial bankruptcy. And in the emergency, they went ahead and applied, and they said that image of the check should be used instead of taking the cited artwork again. So the question I get at some of the meetings, which is there is, well, in order to improve healthcare and do it, if all the doctors go on strike, will it help or not? That's one of the questions that have been raised a number of times in meetings. And you'll be very happy if you can fully answer what the answer, the real answer to that question. So this is one of the models that we found has been very effective in terms of making a change, working with industry, working with governments. And I've used the same kind of method for the Internet Telephony Consortium. When Internet telephony came in, most countries in the world were actually banning Internet telephony. And the reason they were banning it is it was competing with the telecom giants, within these countries were owned by the governments themselves. So they thought of Internet telephony as a competition and they wanted to ban it down. So again, we worked with industry, worked with other partners, set up a consortium at MIT, went around the countries and told them, if you ban it, you cannot regulate it. And if you allow it, then at least you can regulate it and it will come anyway, so you might as well. And by the way, one of the students who was among the set was very upset on my check processing thing, why do I do things like this? He later adopted the same model of doing things for free for the society. His name is Salman Khan and he started Khan Academy. That's how the origins of Khan Academy is. So there's a lot of ripple effect which takes place when we do things like this. Khan Academy is the one which gives free education courses to people in the poorest ones, in the US and other places, as well as the children of Bill Gates also use Khan Academy's materials. So that is the impact it has. So now on the other side, I should tell you that I have, when I gave this presentation in Washington, people asked me, oh, you should file a complaint against the hospital chain and all, and I said, no, it will just spoil my mood, nothing will happen. They said, no, you file it, you need to definitely do something about it, go through the official process and all. I went through the official process for it. They said, we're going to take it very seriously, this is a very serious thing. That is instead of Los Angeles, where all these laws are anti-patient dumping and all are formed. There are state regulations. They said we'll take care of it. They assigned a person to it. She interviewed me. Then 2-3 weeks later, I'm told, no, this case has been transferred to another person. and then it was transferred to another person. And finally they told me, oh, we contacted the hospital, we wrote a complaint to them, the hospital investigated it, and therefore we are not going to take any further action in this matter. That was the end of it. If anybody is here from the government, please, I apologize to you. I'm not talking about you in person. But again, and by the way, the agency, the same agency in Indian Radiation, become an expert member of one of the panels on a totally different disease that they wanted my help on the computer side. And they said, we can't afford money, you should come in for free and all. And that was one of the invitations that I actually declined. Okay. So in order to develop new standards, in order to develop things, this is the situation where you have to work with competing organizations in order to move forward. When we did check processing, when we did internet telephony, when we've done in other areas, we have to really work together with competing organizations in different countries in order to do it. And again, taking an approach which is unique for the US in an area. At this time of time, we are talking computer-based techniques. I think it's not the right approach to take. We should really think at a much larger level at international level. So we went ahead and used this technology to develop the neural network technology. We tried to do it for mammograms. Again, we went into a lot of bureaucratic things in order to do it. And even today, some of the technologies that we have developed for mammogram, they are still not in commercial use. We were so far ahead of it. And this is one of the complaints my wife makes against me, which I actually agree with, which is that I'm so far ahead of the crowd, nobody here knows that I'm there. That's my competing problem with all these disciplines that I do. I'm going to go over some of these things quickly because we have a very distinguished audience here and many of you are already familiar. One is in the area of neural networks, how neural networks are able to outperform things better than human beings. In the case of check processing, for example, I gave an experiment to my students and I said, here's the number 4. Write down all the laws which you can write, how the 4 is defined. And they wrote it down and said, 4 starts at the top, there are 2 bars which come from the top, they go in this direction and all. They spent, I had 5 students work about 3 days to work on it, and even with all the rules that came up with, I could still write a 4. We did not fall any into those categories. So the neural networks and all, we're trying to read the machine come up with rules for it. That's what we're trying to do. But again, there's a lot of human value to it. And I should tell you, in the case of the drug company that was mentioned, the challenge problem that was given to me was that we have some stores where this drug is only bought once every year. We want to know when this drug is, we'll give you data for the last 5 years, which is 5 data points. Tell us when this drug is going to be bought again at that store. That was the challenge problem that was given to me. My staff worked on it, they came up with a system, they said it's 90% accurate. I said, no, it can't be 90% accurate. There's a problem with 5 data points. No, it doesn't. I sent 2 other students to analyze the code and all. They said, yes, it's fine, go ahead and do it. And in a normal case, I would have just gone ahead and said, MIT developed technology, we can do it, and it would have solved it. I was not satisfied. I went ahead and analyzed it further and finally proved to the team that that algorithm was actually cheating on itself. It was using information which it should not use. So again, I'm saying that there are a lot of things which are happening today, which I'm really very skeptical about. And again, I find it a very poor thing. And just because of my meeting at the Federation of State Medical Boards, we are going through a very extensive process around the country. We are updating all the state medical boards. Ask them what happens if somebody has been found to be at fault for anything that the person is disbarred or anything like that. What can they do? And not one state at this point has any restrictions that a person who has been disbarred from service cannot work in the digital field in healthcare after the person has been disbarred. I find it really very bothersome because it's just like the case which happened after 9/11. They made a rule that the pilot's door should be shut, nobody should be able to open it and all. And give this Lufthansa case where they have a pilot who's a window case, he takes the plane and actually crashes it purposely and they were not able to make it. So even though we talk about all the wonderful things, unless there is some way we have a peer review or somebody else doing it, or at least the patient reported outcomes coming back into some form, I'm very cautious about it, what's going to happen with some of these technologies and business processes which are being developed. Okay, so large scale analysis. So even though we said that the particular one could not be done, we actually came out and as we started analyzing huge amounts of data from this chain, and they were very good, they gave us all this information. We actually were able to come that in the long term, the model we can develop to reduce their inventory levels by 50% and still have the same quality of their finding a drug in stock when and where needed. It would not be. We've seen the contradiction of terms, but that's what we were able to do. So there are a lot of wonderful things which you can do. Don't just go for the low-hanging fruit. That is my second observation. And my third observation is these are areas where you have to work with competitors, you have to work with academia, you work with industry in order to really make major impact on the society. The other issue which is there is that when we talk of new systems, I talked about the area of knowledge discovery. When we talk of knowledge-based systems, there are these four different pillars to it: knowledge management, knowledge dissemination, knowledge acquisition, and knowledge system. In the area of knowledge acquisition, I find a lot of contradictions at this point. When we try to find what the ground truth is, what is right and what is there, we can find all kinds of articles in the literature, which makes it very difficult to say what is the ground truth, how should we create these systems, automated systems. When we as human beings are saying contradictory thing, that makes it very difficult. We have a lab on my floor at Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, which was funded by Toyota on the autonomous drivers. They do a wonderful job, but the thing which creates the maximum problem for them is when the set of traffic lights is there and a policeman comes in and the policeman is overriding what is on the traffic lights. So those are the kind of situations that really create problems for machines to learn, and that's essentially what's happening as far as the area is concerned. There's no stability. We have to have much better ways of reproducing the information, reproducing the results, reproducing the research, being able to do it. And this is the reproducibility crisis that we are going through. And again, we don't have any systematic international ways to do it, or even national ways, or even statewide ways to do it. That is going to impede the development of this industry. This is my favorite one, because this is the one where I have done a lot of work over the years. At the time of the Grenada War, the pilots in the air could not talk to the soldiers in the field. They were using different communication frequencies with different equipment. That's the way they fought the war. So the pilot talked to the air headquarters of the top, and already formed with the army headquarters of the top of the soldiers of the field. So after the war, President Reagan got very upset. He said, enough is enough. Had things to be designed for things of Army, Air Force, and Navy to work together. And I got drafted to be a principal investigator for some of these kinds of projects to look after them. And it was very interesting because the Army had 20-digit part number, Air Force had 15-digit part number, Navy had 40-digit part number. They wanted me to come up with a 100-digit part number so that everybody could use their own pieces to it. And I used to give the example how you really change people in real life. We have 200 currencies in the world. Like I said, you convert everything to everything else. You need 200 times 199 converters. How you do in real life is you convert one currency into dollars and pounds, and then you convert it to the other form. Then the problem becomes into 200 plus 199, and this is called the mediation approach, and that's what I advocated. So I wrote a number of papers, I wrote a book on it, on integration of heterogeneous information system, and my one-line summary of that book is that in as much as it's bad to have information on paper, it's worse to have it on computers which want to speak to each other. And that's essentially what we have done. Immediately after that work, I actually wrote to the federal government, different agencies. I said, we're going to have the same problem in healthcare. Let's work on it right now. Let's do it. Nobody listened to me. We have spent $55 billion since that time on the area of interoperability, and we are making a total chaos in this area. We have totally regional systems which don't speak to each other. We have systems being done in countries like Kosovo and others, which are national systems, which are again island. We are just making it worse day by day by day. And blockchain, yes, is good in terms of authenticating the record. It's good in terms of finding the identity if you don't want to have a centralized identity. But in terms of semantic mapping and all, we still have a long way to go. And that's another area where we are trying to do what can be done through the consortium model. But the irony that I find in the healthcare industry is that when I talk of financial industry or internet telephony and all, when I went to the different people, they were very willing to work together in a consortium. They were very willing to work together in a mode in which industry, academia, government to work together. But when I try to do it in interoperability, everybody wants to go their own direction. They think they have the best solution. They think they're already working with partners. Nobody wants any intervention. They just want to complain about it. And that's one of the areas which has been very difficult for us to tackle and play a role in. And that's what I continue to try to see, whether we can still create a consortium where we have some. And in a consortium, I should tell you, is the first or second organization which make the most difference. It's like getting an anchor tenant into a shopping mall. Once you get a big anchor tenant, everybody else wants to come in that shopping mall. We have not been able to do it, and I'm myself saying that. I make this presentation to the federal government, I make it in other places, they all hear about it, but nothing tangible happens in this area. So I told you about the Grenada War, I talked about different countries, the IoT. Another area which is there is that in the case of electronic health records, which were done in a hurry. There's an article, those of you who have not read it, I would really Officer Distributed is of 2017, written by Adela Milstead. She was originally at Harvard School of Public Health. And she has attributed the blame for the EHR problem and in terms of records, 50% of the blame on information blocking she has placed on the EHR companies themselves. 25% she has placed on hospitals themselves in terms of doing it. So again, it's a reading, things have changed a little, but not too much from that point of time. That is a way that I really want people to think about. We talk about things are happening, but the pace at which they're happening, there's no leadership in it. I still find. By the way, don't get me wrong by leadership. The committees which have been set up by the government, they've done an impressive job over the years. We've had the head of one of the main companies being on the committee. We've had people from industry on the committee. We've had people from medical being on the committee. We've had policymakers being on the committee. But one of the things which I'm missing in all these committees is not a single top-notch computer professional with background in interoperability who has been on any of these committees in all these tests. That's the missing piece which I thought was. Okay, the next one I take is knowledge dissemination. How do we really disseminate the knowledge? And in this case, I do want to bring one particular case to your attention. Anybody here heard of the Jeannie Clary Act? Jeannie Clary was the first year student at Lehigh University. During the first year, she got raped and murdered at the university. After she was raped and murdered, her family took it up with the Congress. They basically, until that time, every university, every college used to complain, we are the best, we are very safe, nothing ever happened to us. That was the standard code everybody used to operate. And after that, the Jeannie Clary Act was passed. And it requires that every college, every high school and all has to give statistics on the number of complaints which have been made. Not the number of cases where went to litigation, not the number of cases where lawyers said, no, we can't talk about it because you're giving you some money, we can't talk about it anymore. This is a basic complaint. And every university now does it, and it has made a dent in terms of what has happened in terms of campus security. And by the way, the university gets larger number of complaints every year is the Stanford University. It has the largest land campus of any university in the world, except for Boston University. It has the highest one. Being higher does not mean you're immediately back, but it gives a good to the. And here again, you're saying there should be some measures like this in terms of patient-reported outcomes. And new devices, new treatments are coming up. Instead of relying, we have a method by which we can evaluate it, the patients can evaluate it and report back to it. Can this data be used for retaining the neural network, which is very important to new populations and all, not just from the original sample size, but make it available to other people. So this is an area again that we're trying to see what can and should be done in this particular area. So MIT has an EIC database. We allow people to use it, put it in the public domain. I've gone over many of these things. In the past, I've advised the World Health Organization. I played a major role in writing the global policy on health informatics, which was official documents, surveillance of drugs and all. So in terms of further work, I welcome the opportunity to collaborate, to work on specific problems. If you want to see more material about it, you can go online, and there's a lot of material about us which is available online. If you just go to mit.edu and you put my name in, you'll be able to access a lot of papers. Thank you very much.
The 2019 Converge to Accelerate conference is brought to you by IEEE, the world's largest technical professional organization for the advancement of technology. Boehringer Ingelheim, passionately working to improve healthcare. NASCO, advancing digital health together. IPSI US, the Association of Independent Workers, for one, for all. Partners in Digital Health, publishers of the forward-reaching blockchain in Healthcare Today and Telehealth and Medicine Today. Special consideration to iWorker Innovations, taking the independent workforce to new heights. Connected Health Conference, designing for healthy habits and better outcomes. Haven Health Solutions, providing true blockchain transactional interoperability. Special thanks to Seaport World Trade Center for hosting us. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away.